Hi everyone, this is Chris Craig with Unanet, and I'm joined by Regan Johnson from the Griffiss Institute. This webinar is 7 key metrics for project-driven nonprofit organizations. And before we get started, just a few housekeeping items. If you're experiencing any latency with the screens that are being displayed and what we're talking to, quickest resolution is probably just rejoining the GoToWebinar. For whatever reason, if you get kicked off, or the screen freezes up, we found the easiest way is just to rejoin the webinar. Number 2, if you look at the GoToWebinar console, there's an orange arrow that basically maximizes and minimizes the control panel. So if you open that up, there's a question section in the GoToWebinar console, and I do want to make this as interactive as possible. So if you have any questions as we go through this, please feel free to log those in the question section of the console, and I will periodically go over there and try to respond to the questions. If you have a question, it probably means somebody else has a question, so we want to make sure your questions are answered. And then finally, for the agenda, I'm going to give a brief overview of Unanet, who we are, what we do, where we fit, and then I'll turn it over to Regan, who's a Unanet client at the Griffiss Institute, and she can describe her experience with Unanet. And then I will get into kind of 7 key metrics for the nonprofit organizations and actually show those within the Unanet software. So we'll go ahead and get started. And again, if you have any questions, please feel free to log those into the console of the GoToWebinar. So Unanet is a cloud software platform for nonprofits to manage projects, people, and financials/accounting. It does everything from budgeting and planning, resource scheduling in the future, forecasting. It does timesheets or time tracking, expense reports, approval workflow around both of those. It does a variety of analytics, and that's really what we're going to focus on when I get into the software, is the analytics and the KPIs that are capable of being produced by Unanet that are relevant to nonprofits. And then it does billing and revenue recognition, so generating invoices, recognizing the revenue, whether it's a time and materials engagement or fixed price or cost plus type engagement. And then accounting, so full financials. So Unanet can either sit on top of a QuickBooks type system, or it could completely replace a QuickBooks type system for general ledger, income statement, balance sheet, accounts payable, accounts receivable, and really, probably most importantly, for the project-driven nonprofits is the indirect cost calculations and allocations. So calculating fringe, overhead, G&A, and then applying those throughout the system. So we've pulled our existing customer base, and this is the feedback we've received from them on why they've selected Unanet. Again, it is one system. It's one single source of truth. So oftentimes we talk to nonprofit organizations that are running, a QuickBooks and a separate timesheet system and a separate budgeting tool, and they have 6 or 7 Excel spreadsheets open on their desk at all times. Unanet kind of consolidates everything again into one single source of truth, and because it is one single source of truth, it's all real time, it's all live data. So as soon as people are putting in information on the timesheet, it's immediately available in all the burn rate reports, all the utilization reports, all the margin reports. In other words, you don't have to wait a week or 2 weeks or twice a month to get at the data. It's very intuitive, it's very easy to use. We'll show you that when we get into the software. It's 100% web-based. We do offer a cloud as well as an on-premise model. We had 76 new customers added in Q4 of 2018, which was a record for us last quarter, and 72 of them went with the cloud option. So cloud seems to be the more prevalent option. However, we do support both options. Both options are web-based. If you do run on our cloud, we're at Amazon Web Services in a secure environment. We've had a SOC 2 audit done. We've also done some benchmarking reports that show those companies running Unanet have a 50% lower G&A headcount than the ones that run other legacy systems. And then the future, you can forecast into the future. You can, put in your plans, your budgets, and adjust based on the actuals coming in. So we do have over 1,000 clients using the software now. These are some of our clients, again, in the nonprofit arena. And I guess people always ask me, how big do you have to be to use Unanet? And it's really not a matter of size at all. We have some organizations that are less than 10 employees. It's really kind of a factor of how much do you like to look at the data, right? How the metrics that we're going to show, how much do you like to look at that? And then also, you know, what are your plans for growth? So we've had some organizations start with 20 employees and now they're 500 employees. So it's a very scalable solution. You don't need to rip it out and replace it later. Just a little background on the company. We were founded in 1988 as an IT services firm, a consulting firm. In 1998, we re-engineered into a software product company. So in our current model, we were in production for over 20 years now. And we've sort of built around this one organic platform. We're the highest rated project-based ERP on G2 Crowd, which is a Gartner-like site for evaluating software. We've won the Washington Post Top Workplace Award the last 3 years. We also have a nationwide network of partners all across the country that refer Unanet, but also are certified on how to implement Unanet and configure, train Unanet for their customers. We're 100% developed and supported in the United States, so all of our development is done in Dulles, Virginia. All of our support is in Dulles and Denver. And then we've been on the Inc. 5000 list for the fastest growing small businesses, privately held businesses. And you know, we're self-funded, we're profitable, there's no debt on our balance sheet, we're employee-owned. And why that's important is because basically it's a pretty simple model. The customers tell us what to do, and then we put it into the software. Okay, so at this time, I really appreciate Regan joining from Griffiss Institute. She's a Unanet client, and I thought, you know, rather than me drone on about Unanet and its benefits, I turn it over to her, and she'd kind of share her experience as a nonprofit using Unanet, and then we'll come back to me to go through the 7 key metrics for nonprofit organizations. I'm sure some of which Regan will touch on during her presentation. So Regan, are you out there?
Yes, I am.
Thank you for joining today. And I'll advance the slides for you.
Okay, thank you. So thank you for having me, and greetings everyone from upstate New York. And I am going to just share about 20 minutes to share with you some of the wonderful experiences that we have had using the Unanet software. So next slide. So just so that you know a little bit about Griffiss Institute, we are an independent 501c3 entity. We were originally established in 2002, and we were set up initially with New York State funding. And our mission was to bring together government, industry, and academia to facilitate and grow the technology base of this region. We are a business incubator, which we started in 2007. And we are also a government contractor, and we received our first government contract, which is a very unique type of contract that we have, but we got that in 2008. And since then, we've actually grown to become a very viable part of the economic climate in this region. We support the local Air Force Research Lab Information Directorate, which is what our partnership intermediary agreement does. We also do a lot of partnering with industry and universities across the United States. And we are recognized by the Air Force, DOD, and the Air Force Research Lab for the technology transfer work that we do. Next slide. So what we do is we are contract with the government. I mentioned that it was a little bit unique. And the reason that I say that is we have a partnership intermediary agreement with the Air Force Research Lab, so we facilitate tech transfer. And a lot of people, if you're looking at being a government contractor, which is what I thought most companies, nonprofits might be looking at Unanet for, although that was in the beginning, and now I feel like there's a lot more benefit to nonprofit companies of all kinds to utilize the Unanet software. But we looked at Unanet because we were a government contractor initially. And the work that we do is facilitating technology transfer. So we do not build widgets, we do not do research. We actually facilitate a lot of activities. We run a local STEM program, we run internship programs, we work for the Air Force across the US and the bases that are located in different countries. We are a New York State certified business incubator, and we are a center for training and education. And the reason that I wanted to bring this up is to show you that there is a wide gamut of work that we do, and every one of the activities that we're involved in requires a different type of contracting and project management that we do. Next slide. So before Unanet, which was the period from 2008 to 2014, we really didn't have a lot of financial insight into our projects. And I mean, we were tracking our projects and we were doing, you know, all of the things that we were required to do. But we didn't really understand what indirect rates were. We didn't know how they worked. We were doing all of our employee management using Excel timesheets. We did upgrade for a short time to Paychecks Online timesheets, which sort of worked, but not really. We also did all of our employee expense reporting using Excel. And all of those things, if you're doing them now, you probably realize that they take a lot of time. All of our project management was also done using Excel. And I used to have to create manual invoices for all of our projects because of the different type of invoicing that was required for each one of our projects, and the backup supporting documentation that I had to pull together just to make an invoice, because all of my information that I needed to put into an invoice was in separate systems. So it used to take me about 5 hours per invoice just to put a package together to send out to get reimbursed. So those are the immediate struggles that we were facing when we started really looking at the Unanet software. So next slide. So I put together a list of challenges for nonprofits. And I'm kind of hoping that some of these challenges also that pertain to us, even now, will pertain to some of you who are running your own nonprofits. We're all faced with government regulations and tax reform. And we all know that there's not a lot you can do to get around those. But in what I'm going to talk about today and show some solutions for are the challenges. You know, there's been a lot of changes in the last few years for government contractors in particular. We've got uniform guidance that has come out that pertains to most of our government contracts. There's new procurement requirements. There's new subcontractor management requirements. Just the process of calculating indirect rates, those are all regulated challenges that we have, and we have to make sure that we follow the rules when it comes to those things, and whether they're regulated by state, by the feds, by your clients, they're all regulations that we have to follow. There's also specific financial reporting regulations that we have to follow. We have to make sure that we're keeping track of restricted funds. We have to make sure that we're doing our cost allocations properly. So all of these things are challenges that nonprofits have to find a way to manage those so that you can go on with your daily business. The next thing that I wanted to just briefly talk about was organization growth, revenue, funding, and fundraising concerns. Now, obviously, growth, revenue, funding, all of those things are extremely important to any organization. But for nonprofits in particular, and what we have found is making sure that we have a proper segregation of funds is incredibly important within our system. And you try to balance that with also being able to do appropriate reporting that your board of directors can understand, along with reporting that your customers can understand. and making sure that you can keep everything separate and straight so that you're not creating a million accounts on your chart of accounts just to try to segregate funding. How you represent your financial statements is another big process that you have to go through. There are so many different ways that you can show your growth and your revenue and make sure that your people that are donating funds to your organization or just your clients are satisfied that you're being fiscally responsible. And so how you represent all that through your financial statements is very important, and having a system that can help you simplify that process is also a very big benefit. How you manage people, how you manage your projects, all of those have an impact on your growth of your organization. And sometimes it's just difficult to try to balance all of those things, but they're big concerns for nonprofits. The ability to calculate and forecast indirect rate allocation, or just your indirect expenses. I didn't realize how important this was, but whether you're a government contractor or not, it is still important to be able to identify whether you're recovering your costs from your activities. Are you being fair across the board? Are you making sure that every single client that you're working with or customer or activity is sharing it in the burden of the costs that allow your organization to run? And how are you doing that? How are you calculating out how much your indirect costs are and what your burden should be on your activity? Are you doing it in a spreadsheet? Are you manually calculating that stuff? Or are you able to do that in one of the systems that you have? Unanet has a fantastic ability to be able to help calculate indirect rates and show your indirect allocations. Staffing challenges. This is probably one of a very big problem for most nonprofits. We're constantly trying to do more and more and more work with less people. And most of us find that we have a very small staff, and every staff member has so many functions that they're trying to perform. So adding a new task and a new function is just, it can be overwhelming. But one of the things that we realized is that sometimes part of your staffing challenge is due to the fact that people are duplicating actions, which if you look at your technology and the things that you're using to do your work, you can actually accomplish those things in a much smarter way and actually use less people to do them. So technology and software concerns. This is usually a big one. Do you want to have your own IT person? Do you want to have a lot of overhead in your organization that you spend on keeping your technology running? I know here at the Griffiss Institute that we have embraced technology and we use it to help us work. We embrace cloud-based solutions as often as we can because it helps with our IT overhead, but we are very concerned with security and data protection. And we balance all of that with the fact that we need to stay current and we need to make sure that we have good equipment to work on. And again, we use technology to help us. Membership and recruitment. This one showed up in a lot of the research that I did. And I think for most of us working and running nonprofits, we find that many nonprofits have a membership that is looking at what they're doing. You may have people that are that provide funds towards your organization, and you consider them to be members, and you're constantly going out trying to promote your nonprofit. And what we have found is that being able to really show fiscal responsibility for the funds that are being provided to our organization and being able to do that effectively through financial reporting has really allowed us to increase our ability to retain funders and even to recruit additional funders to help support our organization. So next slide. So what I'm going to do is talk about some of the solutions that we have found to all of these problems through Unanet, because Unanet, as Chris mentioned, is a single source of truth. It's a single application or program that we use, and we do have all of the modules here at the Griffiss Institute. We do our people, expense, project, and financial tracking all within the Unanet software. And so the benefits that I'm going to talk to you about are a result of having all of those different modules available to us. And I'd like to add that when we initially decided to start using Unanet, we were only looking at it for time and expense. Then we realized that project tracking came along with it. And then during our first meeting, they mentioned that they were coming out with this financials piece. And we were already looking at switching to another program. I think it was QuickBooks. And we just decided at that point we were going to stop and consolidate everything into one system. So we did make the decision right away to just throw it all in and go all in with Unanet, which we have not regretted at all. So within Unanet, you can actually have multiple financial organizations. This is important because we do have another 501c3 subsidiary of the Griffiss Institute, and we have to keep all of our finances separate, and we can do that literally through the Unanet software. So it's no additional cost, but we can track multiple financial organizations all through the licensing that we have with Unanet. We do all of our GL budgeting right in Unanet. You can do this at the account and organization levels. This is helpful for when you are doing your calculating your indirect rate in Unanet and you want to have multiple indirect rates. For example, the Griffiss Institute has multiple fringe rates, multiple overhead rates, and just a single G&A rate. And we're able to do all of that based on the budgets that we create for our through the GL budgeting process. The financial system also does a great job of revenue recognition. So we're able to track our revenue without having a million revenue accounts, which is helpful. You can track it obviously at the account level, but then as an added feature, you can track everything at the project level, which we'll get to later. Very simple cost allocation, and you can have multiple expense types within Unanet, which helps you. If you use credit cards a lot for your expenses, you can tag expense types to accounts within the system, and it allows you a lot of flexibility with how you're actually posting your expenses into your general ledger. You can have multiple internal organizations. So while I mentioned under the first bullet that you can have multiple financial organizations, you can also have multiple internal organizations, which can also help segregate your costs. One of the biggest things and the greatest things I think about the Unanet software is you can calculate multiple indirect cost rates. I do this every year within Unanet. It's one button. Within one button, you can calculate indirect rates based on your budget. And it did take us a little bit of time to get used to that, but we worked through it, and we are very excited now and able to calculate our indirect rates every year through the Unanet software. And also the financials package integrates with all of your project reports. So it saves us a ton of duplication and extra work, which we used to have to do manually in an Excel. Now it's just all in one system. You put an invoice into the AP system and it can show up on all of your project financial reports, which saves us a lot of time and energy. And your accounts on your general ledger some of those accounts can actually be set to require a project, which can eliminate any errors in inputting and any expenses being posted into accounts that require a project. If you don't select a project, you can't do it. So it really does help track those financial expenses. Next slide. So projects. we didn't really view ourselves as a project-based organization when we started this. Yes, we had some contracts. We had contracts with New York State. We had private contracts with other organizations, and we had contracts with the federal government. But I didn't really feel like I didn't view the Institute itself as a project-driven organization until we started working with the Unanet staff. And what we learned is that we can segregate every activity that we do into a project, whether it's a direct project or an indirect project. And examples of indirect projects are holidays, PTO, your overhead expenses, all those other things that may not be direct expenses. They're all indirect, and we actually have projects set up to track those within Unanet. So we're literally tracking all of our expenses as they come through against projects in our system. And it gives us much better revenue and expense tracking within our system, which is helping us gain a lot of insight into where the Griffiss Institute is and the health of our organization. At the project level, you can set up project budgets. So in addition to having a organization budget that you set up on the financial piece, every one of your projects can have a project budget, which is very helpful also because your project managers a lot of times will know more about the project that they're leading than your financial people. So if you create a project budget, you can actually use that project budget to help you create your organization budget for each year, and therefore eliminate some unforeseen expenses that might come through that you did not plan for. The project reports, these are absolutely fantastic. Most of the reports in Unanet can be generated with one-click generation. You have the ability to share reports. So many times I will create reports that our project managers need to see, and I will save them as a shared report so that the project managers can go into the shared list and just pick the report that I've prepared and save it for themselves or just open it on their computer. And then it enables them not to make mistakes when they're running reports, and they can actually see the information that I'm looking for them to see. The project piece completely integrates with the financial piece of Unanet. So again, when you enter in an invoice for a project into your financial, your accounts payable, it will show up as an expense on your project so that you can see it right away. So you're not having to get a report of your financial expenses and then enter them into a separate system in order to keep track of your project costs. This helps to reduce errors, and it definitely eliminates duplication. And you can get reporting for customized date ranges. So this is important because our fiscal year for the Griffiss Institute runs on a calendar year. Our government projects run on the government fiscal year. Our state projects run from the time that they were initiated for 12 months or 24 months or whatever the period of performance is. Within Unanet, I'm actually able to run reports based on whatever time period I want, regardless of when my fiscal year is. So I can run my government project reports on their fiscal year and just pick up all the expenses that are within that period, which saves a lot of time for me. And again, the project reports that we are able to produce provide a lot of clarity to our board of directors. We have a few project reports that we're able to put together that enables our board to better understand the progress that Griffiss Institute is making on our projects versus just showing them the financial reports that they kind of glaze over during the financial segment of our board meetings. So it really helps them to see how much funding we have left, how much time we have left, and where we are exceeding and where we may have to work a little harder to exceed the goals on our projects. You can also have project notes, which are a big benefit. We put a lot of notes into our system. We keep all of our copies of our contracts, copy of our contract modifications. You can keep copies of any of your important project data within your project files. I actually use notes to keep information in the system for our auditors. We keep copies. We have an internal project for finance set up, and we keep copies of our board minutes and copies of our bank statements and copies of a lot of other financial information that our auditors ask for every year, along with copies of our contracts, so that when our audit comes up, we can give our auditors access to the system and just tell them where to find the reports, and then they start asking us for less information each time, which is a benefit during our audit. Next slide. Time and expense. This is real-time reporting from timesheets that people enter. So every employee that we have enters a timesheet into our system, and within the Unanet system, it's just very helpful because as soon as someone puts their time in on a timesheet, even if it's not submitted, we can get real-time reports on that time that's been put in. We can control the time that people can put on, well, not necessarily control the time, but we can apply controls from the project standpoint for people as they're working on projects. For example, we have some part-time employees that are only allowed to work 20 hours a week. And as we work through our process, we can actually assign those employees in our system to be allocated 20 hours per week. And when they put the time in on their timesheet, it will alert them if they've gone over the 20 hours, which helps us control our budget and also alerts us very quickly if there's a problem, because when someone sees a red error on their timesheet, they usually call us to find out why they can't submit it. And it helps us to identify those issues, helps our project managers to be able to say, hey, I only gave you 40 hours on this project, so you can't charge anymore. And then it really does help alert us if there's any problems. The process of putting in expense reports for travel and other project activities is wonderful within the Unanet software. We also have a credit card import, so all of our employees that have credit cards, they do put in expense reports for those, which eliminates the need for one of our financial people to have to go through the credit card statement and enter each expense individually. It provides a great audit trail. Again, our auditors love the software. When they want to go in and check timesheet approvals, we give them access to the system so that they can see that. Also helps us on the financial end to be able to audit what people are doing. And also approvals for timesheets can be at the person and project level, so you can have multiple people approving people's timesheets. Next slide. Automation and analytics. Not going to spend a lot of time on this, but you can customize any kind of export or import and a lot of processes within the Unanet software, which can help you control and manage other people's views into what they're looking at, and also make sure that certain things with your people and projects are being set up properly when you have multiple users doing that. Next slide. Our favorite reports. The project revenue and funding summary is by far our favorite report. Our customers love it. It tells them exactly where we are on the project. It rounds everything up. You can have budget and funded. So at the beginning of the year, we plan to a budget, but they may not fund it all at the same time. So we can show funding and budget separately on this report. It has the roll-up capability for project tasks. So hopefully Chris will show you that when he goes through the demo, but it allows us to show maybe big picture to our board of directors and then detail for our project managers. And it's just the same report, just one toggle switch that allows you to go between different levels. The project transactions report, that allows you to see all transactions that have occurred on your project. This one is very helpful. Just if you're having trouble identifying what some of your expenses are that have gone in through the financial end of the software, you can pull up your project transaction report. Performance reports are great for people. You can see how many hours someone has worked, what their average hours are, how many hours someone's been assigned. You can run it at the person level, or you can run it based on your projects. And this can help you make sure that you are not over allocating resources on a project that you don't have the funding for. The project cost summary report is one that I use. It's customizable. So depending on who my customer is, I have a special report that I run for my projects that are for New York State, and it helps me to put my New York State requisitions together to submit. And then I have a different layout that I can run that report for my federal customers. And the fact that they can be customized and then run with one click is just absolutely amazing. And then one of the more newer income statement reports that they added last year was the trending income statement, which is another one of my favorites. I like to be able to see all the expenses broken out over the 12-month period, which is very helpful. Next slide. The accessibility of the program, I'm not even going to say anything else about this. It is amazing. It's web-based. Our employees can access this from wherever they are. So we have remote employees. They can access it from wherever they are. We don't have any additional costs associated with it. And again, it's all real time. So it's a huge benefit to us. Next slide. So now, I kind of mentioned where we were. Where we are now is in a much better place. We have much better financial management, employee management, and project management. I went from 5 hours per invoice to 5 minutes. I can actually do all of my invoices for all of my projects in 5 minutes. I know I say 5 minutes per invoice here, but that was when I first got started. So now I'm a little bit more seasoned. I can actually do them all at once. And it's a fantastic, the progress for Griffiss Institute has been fantastic because we can now really streamline our processes and do so much more than we thought we could when we first started with the Unanet software. Next slide.
All right, thank you, Regan. That was amazing. That was awesome. Thank you very much. So Regan will stay on, and now I'm going to switch over to Unanet and actually go through some of the metrics that Regan talked about and just make sure everyone's on the same page as far as how they're being calculated and why the data is important and when to use the data. So it's hard to pick 7, but I picked these 7, and I'm going to add in the project revenue and funding summary report as well. So this is the Unanet software. And when you log in, it is a role-based system. So depending on the roles you associate with people's profiles, that determines their level of access into the system, what they can and cannot see, what they can and cannot edit, which projects they would have access to, which departments, which employees, etc. So as a role-based system, you can limit who can view information versus who can edit information, etc. And right now, you can make these dashboards as simple or as sophisticated as you want. This dashboard is fairly sophisticated because it allows us to answer 95% of the questions we get with 2 or 3 clicks of a mouse. You may only have one chart on your dashboard or certain reports on the left-hand side. So when we say the word dashboard, each of these menu items across the top represents a different dashboard. So this is our project dashboard with another set of charts and reports. This is our forecast dashboard with another set of reports. So you can place the various charts and reports on the different dashboards. I'm going to make it a little bit bigger so hopefully you can see it on your screen. I did want to remind everyone, and there's been several people that have joined since we first started, there is a question section of the GoToWebinar console. So if you have questions you'd like to ask during the course of the webinar, please feel free to enter those in the GoToWebinar section, and I'll try to answer those as they come in. All right, so utilization. When we do these webinars, we get a variety of feedback on what are the most commonly run reports for organizations in the nonprofit space, and utilization usually comes out on top. As Regan mentioned, we have a limited amount of resources, and we're always being asked to do more with less. So we need to make sure our resources are fully optimized. So this is a report, a very simplistic report showing you effectively quote unquote utilization. So how are we defining utilization? Well, if we go back to the criteria of the report, we can say, you know, what people do we want to look at, but we can also say, effectively, there's a numerator and a denominator. So in the numerator of the calculation, there's billable time, or bid and proposal time, or R&D time. You can define different project types, and you can put these different project types into the numerator. So, you know, different organizations have different categorizations for utilization. So you can say what time that's entered on the timesheet actually counts for the utilization calculation. And then some organizations, a lot of organizations actually will exclude certain pay codes. So many will take out PTO, paid time off, vacation, sick time, jury duty, bereavement, etc., from both the numerator and the denominator. So they're just not including it at all in the utilization calculation. And then in the denominator, you can use different business weeks. So basically, Unanet has the ability to allow you to define different business weeks. A default business week is 8 hours a day, Monday through Friday, 40 hours a week. And you can define different business weeks, but this is effectively what it's using as the denominator. And then in the report criteria, you can also say, do you want to look at it day over day, week over week, semi-month over semi-month, month over month? So let's say we look at it month over month. We can set the colors to represent whatever thresholds we want here. And then once you define all the reports in Unanet, you can save those reports. So effectively, you give it a name, you name it here, and you can share it out to people as well. So if you want to create the report once and share it out, then you can build that and then have other people run reports. But this is effectively a month-over-month utilization report. Now, this is nice because it's showing you how people were utilized historically, but you'll notice there's nothing in the future here. So Unanet does have the ability to forecast resources or allocate resources into the future. And what we see a lot of nonprofits doing is they're doing this in Excel now. So basically, if we go back to the criteria of the report, instead of saying look at actuals only, we can look at actuals and plans, and we can look at actuals through today, and the system knows that today is today, and when we run this tomorrow, today will be tomorrow, so it always knows what the current day is. But basically, we're looking at actuals and plans. So now when we run the report, we can see the actuals represented by an asterisk and the plans represented by a plus. So this is actual historical data through December. January has actuals and plans in it. And then beyond today's date is plans. So if we needed to forecast out into the future, we can see who's overbooked in red, we can see who's underbooked in yellow, we can see when people become available. We can also run this for certain people with certain skills. So if we wanted to apply, you know, Spanish linguists or German linguists or Java programmers or whatever skill you want to apply to people, these are our 4 people with the Java programming skills. So if we need someone that has Java skills in February, we can see that certain people have availability here. Okay, so that is, you know, utilization, not only actual historical utilization, but also forecasted utilization. And one of the nice things about Unanet, just if we log out as a manager and log in as an end user, the end user could also have access to their own personal utilization. So if you're asking them to hit certain utilization targets, you can give them a tool to see how they're progressing against those targets. And you know, if you're wondering where the data is coming from, this is a sample timesheet. So this is an end user putting in their time on a timesheet. Now you can do weekly, bi-weekly, semi-monthly, monthly. You can start on any day of the week you want. It doesn't have to start on Sunday. But this is how we're getting the actual hours for the historical utilization. Time tracking timesheets is part of Unanet. Okay, so that was the first one. The next one was burn rate. So if I log out as the end user and I log in as a manager again, and this was one of the reports that that Regan cited in her presentation. It's the project performance report. And this is probably one of the most straightforward reports you'll get out of Unanet. It's basically showing you your budget, and your actuals and the variance between the two. You can also set alerts that will trigger when certain thresholds are hit. So instead of having to run this report every day to see how you're progressing against the budget, you can say, ping me when we hit 25% of the budget. And it will automatically ping you with an email, and it shows up in your dashboard when you log in here saying you have unread project performance alerts. So you can click on that and it shows you everything that's triggered since you last checked it. And then going back to one of Regan's reports, this is the project revenue and funding summary. So this report is actually showing you, by project. We talked about having a budget and then also a funded value, because you may be funded incrementally. So this is the budget, and then the backlog is budget less actuals, but then you have funded value and remaining funded, so you can see if you're working at risk or how you're progressing against the budget here in a burn rate type format. And this can be, this is basically showing you dollars. The other report I was showing you was hours, but you can obviously run this data on hours or dollars. There's one other report that I wanted to show related to burn rate. And by the way, we do have graphical dashboards for pretty much all the tabular reports in Unanet. So this is basically showing you actuals and plans in a pictorial format of one of the tabular reports. So we can click on this and we can drill down, and it drills into a tabular report. But if we go back to the chart, the bars are measured on the left-hand side of the y-axis. The lines are cumulative numbers measured on the right-hand side of the y-axis. So we can, track plans versus actuals there. All right, the next one was the earned value metric, and that takes, going back to the PowerPoint on number 3 here, earned value. That takes into account not only the budget and the actual, but also the percent complete. So this is a list of projects in Unanet. If we go into one of these projects, every project has a percent complete associated with it, and the tasks underneath the projects can also have percent completes associated with them. So you have basically a work breakdown structure underneath the project. But the percent complete can either be entered into Unanet, in which case we'll take the percent complete that was entered, or Unanet will calculate the percent complete based on the hours or the dollars. So the hours here are looking at the actual hours, the budgeted hours. If they put in an ETC, an estimate to complete, or a revised budget, an estimated total, we will calculate the percent complete based on other values, unless we are given the percent complete. If we're given a 33% complete, we're going to use that 33% complete. And that also is true for revenue recognition for fixed price work. So if you're recognizing revenue based on percent complete, we will either calculate the percent complete for you, or we will calculate the percent complete. All right. So if we have that percent complete in Unanet, then we can look at a report that shows, actually go over here, earned value. So if we just run this for a few projects, basically what this is showing you is by project and then the percent complete of each project, and for the current period and for the life of the project. This is what we've planned to do. So this is the portion of the budget that falls within the start date of the project to the run date of this report. It's what we've planned to do to this point in time. This is what we've actually accomplished. This is the earned value. This is the percent complete multiplied by the budget. This is what it's costed us to get here. So this is all of our labor, all of our ODCs, all of our indirects. And then you have the metrics from the PMI, the Project Management Institute. But most importantly, if you look at the far right column, it's basically saying if we continue at our current rate, this is how we're expected to finish. So if we can continue along at our current pace, keep going the way we've been going, this is how we're expected to finish, either under or over budget. So a lot of our customers will run this at their weekly or bi-weekly management meetings to determine where they need to focus their efforts. if we go back to the criteria too, you'll notice that you can also run this report based on some filters. So only show us things that are out of bounds by a certain percentage or a certain dollar amount. Okay. So that was number 3. Number 4 and 5 are gross margin and net margin. Okay, so this is a personal favorite of mine. This is a report that's basically showing us gross margin, except I'm going to edit it to pull in a little bit more data. Okay. So what this is basically showing you is, again, the bars are measured on the left-hand side of the y-axis. The line is a cumulative number measured on the right-hand side. This is cost per period, raw cost. This is billable amount per period. And then if we look at this, we can see 192,000 in margin. So what made up that margin? We can drill down and we can see by project, by person, who charged, how much they charged, what did we bill them at versus what they're costing us, and then the margin. So again, margin by person, margin by job, overall margin down here. Now this is gross margin, and that's great. You know, it gives us a view of what's going on. But as Regan mentioned, you know, one of the powerful things in Unanet is the ability to look at indirect costs. So what you can do is you can define different fiscal years, and you can go as far into the future as you want with your fiscal year forecasting. But you can define different cost elements, and you can take those cost elements and you can put them into different buckets for labor, for ODCs, and for indirect. So you can have as many cost elements as you want. And then with cost structures, we can take these cost elements and we can apply the elements differently across the different cost structures. So basically, we have 3 examples here, but for Division A, we're putting our labor using these 3 buckets. For Division A, we're classifying our other direct costs into these 4 buckets. And then for Division A, this is our indirect costs. So this is how we're calculating indirect. So the way you read this screen is like an additive calculator. Fringe is going to be labor multiplied by the rate. Overhead is going to be labor plus fringe multiplied by the rate, etc. And then these are our rates. So for each fiscal year, for each cost structure, we have 3 sets of rates. We have a target rate, a provisional rate, and an actual rate. So again, typically the actual rate is what Unanet is calculating based on your historical values. Your provisional rate and target rate can also be calculated in Unanet with your budgets. They're typically your approved rate or your sandboxing rate. If you want to do a what-if analysis, you can use that. But the nice thing about this is when you run a report, you can run a report on all of your labor, raw labor, all of your other direct costs, which again would be a gross margin type report. But then we can take into account our indirects. So examples of fringe could be your 401k, your insurance, your vacation, that you're indirectly spreading out to your projects. Your overhead could be your office rent. G&A could be your finance team or your admin team. So we're taking these indirect costs and we're spreading them out across all projects, because then we can see a true net margin calculation. So again, gross margin and net margin, you know, this is nice for a project manager because they can see everything in one big block. If I'm in charge of several projects, we have another view that basically does a 1 line per project version of this, and I'll show you that here. So now, you know, it's much easier if you're scanning down. You can see all the labor, all the ODCs. You can see over here revenue by project, margin by project, margin by division. Now, if I go to this report, I can change the criteria of the report, so I can run a definition called the margin summary report. And this basically spells out the difference between gross margin and net margin, right? So by department, by project, we have our revenue first this time, so the revenue's not at the end. And then we have the net revenue. So, you know, what's the revenue attributable to us? Oftentimes, subcontractors are a pass-through, so you can come up with a net revenue calculation. There's not a lot of margin with subs, so you can separate that out. But you can see net revenue less your direct labor and your ODCs is your gross margin. So your project manager may come to you and say, yeah, we're doing fantastic. We have 1.1 million in gross margin. You have 45% gross margin. But when you take into account all the indirects, your fringe, your overhead, your G&A, then you're left with negative 10% net margin or a $264,000 loss. So that's kind of an extreme example, but it gives you a view into the difference between gross margin and net margin, which is frankly an essential calculation, as Regan was pontificating upon, for project-driven nonprofit organizations. All right, billings and revenue, and I know I'm kind of running up on time here. Again, if you do have any questions, please feel free to submit those in the console. I want to make sure you get your questions answered. Questions for me or for Regan on Griffiss's usage of Unanet. One other thing I wanted to show, for time and materials, for fixed price, for cost plus engagements, you can see what you've billed versus what you've recognized in revenue. So this is probably one of the top, well, it is top 7 at least, but I'd probably even higher than that, say top 5 report in Unanet, where you can see what you've billed versus what you've recognized and the difference between the two. So for time and materials, again, it's going to be the same thing, but for fixed price, we talked about how you can recognize revenue based on % complete, or you can do revenue recognition schedules. If you're coming from a QuickBooks world, you can recognize revenue when billed. However, if you want to be in compliance with GAAP, you would do one of the other revenue recognition methods. And then all these numbers are clickable, drillable. Last one here was an AR aging report. I think everyone's seen an AR aging report, so I'll go through that very briefly, and then I'll show the trending income statement that Regan mentioned. But again, please, if we have a few minutes left, if you have any questions, feel free to enter those through the GoToWebinar console, and I'll try to quickly address those. So AR aging report, and then again, you can click through and you can see invoices. So if you give people access to this, they'd be able to see the information for their invoices. One more would be the trending income statement. So you'll notice here we can include actuals, but we can also include the forecast based on either a quarterly reforecast, or you can come up with an optimistic budget versus a standard budget, that kind of thing. So when I run this, this is basically showing us, actuals represented by the asterisk, and then forecast here. And then we could actually, in the criteria, we can compare this against last year, or we could compare it against our finalized budget, so we can see how we're trending. All right, I know that's a lot to get through. Again, I want to thank Regan for joining and sharing her experience with the software. I'll just open it up for anyone. If you want to ask questions through the question section on the GoToWebinar console, please feel free to do so. We'll give it a minute and see if anybody has a question, and then we'll, if no one has a question, we'll end the session. All right. I appreciate everyone's time today. If you do have any questions, please feel free to contact us at unanet.com. Also, I know there's some customers on the call today, so I'll put this out there. we're doing our Champions Conference May 15th through the 17th in San Diego. Regan, hopefully we'll see you there. And any other customers that want to, discuss best practices, receive training on the software, collaborate on the product roadmap, this is a fantastic event to attend. So again, Regan, thank you very much. Do you have any final words of wisdom before we end this?
No, great presentation. This was my first time doing a webinar presentation, so thank you for the opportunity. And to any of you who have not been to the Champions Conference, it is a fantastic place to go and get a lot of information. And every year we do attend with one or two of our staff, and we come back with some really great insights into new opportunities to really help move our organization forward. And I can't say enough about it. It is a very positive experience, and the information that you get is really incredible.
All right. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Regan, and for Regan and all of you and us. It's going to be affected by this incoming polar vortex. Hope everybody stays warm and have a great rest of your week. Thank you very much.
Thanks. Bye-bye.